Turning to Nebraska politics now, the trial began today in a lawsuit against the sponsors of petitions to put medical marijuana on our ballot. A former state senator filed this suit, claiming some of the signatures might be fraudulent. The plaintiffs argue the petitions should be considered void, as one person who collected signatures and another who notarized them are now facing charges. However, the attorney for the petition organizers say the state is trying to silence the voices of thousands of Nebraskans.
It is about the people's precious right to the initiative, the right that they reserve under our Nebraska Constitution to propose a change in the law.
If they do not follow those rules, they cannot be allowed to enact a statute or a constitutional amendment that affects all Nebraskans.
6 News' Brian Mastry is closely tracking these developments in the lawsuit. He'll bring us the very latest from today's arguments and what the suit could mean for Nebraskans coming up in our evening newscasts.